Hey, my friends, thank you for joining us once again. I'm Dr. Tony Soldano, and this is Susan Joseph, occupational therapist. Susan, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Pastor.
This is part 2,
Yes.
and if you didn't see part 1, honestly, you need to go and watch it. Susan, just to give people a little bit of background, you've been an occupational therapist for 24 years. Your patients have ranged from preemies all the way to the oldest was 105.
That's right.
That's awesome. You opened your own clinic. By the way, you just wrote a book. You've worked in hospitals. You're now working in Emerge here in the Greater Toronto area. So you bring a vast knowledge to the table, and we just thank you for your openness and your experience, really.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, Susan, in the last program, we really, ended by talking about the pressure that children are under and what they are being asked to, I guess, mentally disseminate within their own lives. We talked about the effects of COVID and social disorders that now we're seeing in children. Extreme cases like 6-year-olds that have to be constrained by police, by medical personnel, and we're not exaggerating. You've seen this. You've been in the room. First of all, that has to be heart wrenching. I don't think I could handle it, to be honest with you.
It is, but I also want to make it very clear that the police had to restrain because this child was throwing stuff at people, and
Sure.
it was a safety issue.
Sure.
So it wasn't. So I want to make that clear because I don't want people to think that
We're not here. We're pro-police. We're
just
pro-authority. But thank you. I appreciate that. But let's talk a little bit about, why are these children under this pressure? Who's putting them under the pressure? We, in the previous program, we talked about the decay of the family and how that social structure, which is meant to be the fiber of society.
That's right.
We've redefined marriage. We've redefined that, mommy and daddy used to be a man and a woman. Now it might be 2 women, 2 two men. Yep. We have a whole different structure. And this is obviously there's an impact on family dynamics. It's not a popular message, but it's the reality of what we're facing. We have social media that we have access to. We could talk about substance abuse, legalization of marijuana,
Yes.
because now the great idea is, well, let's just make drugs legal and people could solve their own problems. But let me ask you the question from what you see. Not only do you work with children, but families. Where is the pressure coming from? Is it self-made? Are these children creating pressure? And let me ask you this as well, maybe part 1 and part 2. So part 1 is, where is it coming from? Part 2 is, did this always exist and we just ignored it? Was it always there? Or is there something that is happening today that is very, very different than what happened 5, 10, 15 years ago? Maybe answer that one first.
Okay. So I think it always existed. I just think what's happening now is, we didn't have drugs, and substances, the free access to and the availability of it as much. The pressure of the stress just by even on families. So because I'm going to talk about myself just because I am an immigrant mom. I know that, just from a point of view of even culture. So we have subcultures that are happening in between us. So I might have certain expectations of my kids.
Wow.
And my kids are born and brought up here. So they have the Canadian, way of living.
Right.
And I've seen a lot of the kids that I see in the hospitals is them fighting with this, this little subculture that's happening. So they have expectations that are coming from home. And then because they're Canadian, they have the freedom. And as an immigrant, like a mom, and my husband will add to this. Sometimes we even comment about the fact that there's too much freedom. So,
wow, that's very interesting. So let's define that a little bit,
Yes,
right?
yeah.
And so what we're talking about there is, the pressure to succeed. Maybe the pressure, if parents came as immigrants and now it's like, okay, well, my son's going to be a doctor or my daughter's going to be a lawyer. You're going to be everything that I wasn't.
That's right.
And this is why we came here, because this is the land of opportunity. And so now all that pressure is thrown onto the children. And by the way, we had a case just here in the Greater Toronto area where a young man killed himself and his parents because he lied about going to school. He was so ashamed that he didn't want to go to school. He wasn't doing well. And rather than be honest, I mean, he kills himself and his parents. These are the things that we're seeing. And so Susan, you're saying they always existed, but would you say there are more cases today than there ever have been?
Yes, 100%. That's a definitive yes, because we're seeing a lot more even in the hospital. So I think previously what used to happen, it probably was wrapped, it was kept under covers in the sense you were able to manage at home. Or with a smaller community. Right. But now it's come to the point that you need medical professionals coming in because it cannot be managed at home. So you have the police being called in. You're having the crisis team being called in. You're having schools being, the kids are showing these behaviors at schools that they cannot manage at schools. Wow. So it's the resources are being pulled from different, it's not the education system, the policing, you have healthcare, all working together to help this kid just be a kid. And, our kids don't play anymore.
Wow.
Not
unless it's on a screen.
Yeah, exactly.
So I want to make sure we capture this. So really what we're talking about is, from an immigrant standpoint, you have values that come, for example, from the motherland.
Yes.
I want to talk about this idea of the North American, whether we call it Canadian American culture, is that freedom. I can make decisions. And so now what I'm hearing you say is these values clash.
Yes.
These values clash. Let me ask you the question. I have my opinions on this as well, but do you think there is too much freedom here? So a couple of questions. Is there too much freedom? What's wrong with that? Because that's what we espouse in our society, right? Freedom. I mean, now they're espousing that if your child as early as 5, 6 years old thinks that they're a boy in a girl's body, you should start hormone therapy tomorrow, or they want to arrest you. These are children that can barely tie their shoes.
That's right.
And now you're asking them to figure out their sexuality. Okay, I don't want to lead the witness, if you will, but is there too much freedom? And can children handle these freedoms? And what would you say to people that just say, well, Susan, you just don't give these children enough credit?
No, I don't believe there's too much. I mean, I believe there's, like with everything, there has to be boundaries. There has to be parameters. So freedom is great. I mean, we want to be free, but you can't expect a kid to make decisions, because even from a medical point of view, from a brain point of view, you don't even your brain is not developed to make executive decisions till at 22.
Wow.
So for asking a 6-year-old or a 12-year-old, just because let's be honest. Let's talk about if you want to be a boy, I'm in a girl's body. Those decisions should still fall on the parent. And that's my personal opinion. I know that, but that being said, I also think as parents, our kids are intelligent, so they, and because of the access to social media and all of, the people trying to rile up the other kids and say, oh, you know what, this is your right, this is what you should be doing.
Right.
But I also think it's the breakdown of relationships, right? So unless parents are connected with their kids, and I mean connected in the point of, actually having a good relationship where they can come and talk to the parent about anything and have an open relationship, which is hard. Because as a parent, you would want to control. Right. But you have to give up a little bit of control. Right. But then you need to have the guidance. Right. Which in my opinion, which my family and I live by, is the Bible. So we use that as a GPS.
The standard.
As the standard.
Right.
So you don't sway from that.
So we are watching in our society, Susan, thank you for saying that, the educational system, the governmental system. Obviously, we have very strong lobby groups, very strong ideologies today that are saying to parents, we know more than you. And literally they're saying, if you don't do what we tell you, we'll take your children away from you. So now we see the parental voice and authority being minimized for all the propaganda that they are so concerned with children, so concerned with their well-being. And by the way, this is a professional, and you're saying to us, this is not what's happening. Children are not healthier, the reverse, particularly mentally. The reverse is happening. Why then are parents being removed from the equation? Why is that guidance? I love that, the guidance of the balance of parenting. There is some control there. Like, you don't let your children go out at 1 a.m. in the morning. That's control, but that's good control, right? There's guidance, there's standards. Then why are parents being removed from the equation if we're so concerned about children?
So this is where I'm going to disagree. As an OT, a parent is always in the loop. So we cannot do anything without the consent of the parent, and a parent is part of the circle of care.
Right.
But I think sometimes parents themselves are confused. Parents are confused. They have their own stresses. They might be going through their own traumas, and parents at the end of the day want to protect their kids. So if it means giving in to that child or what that child's asking, and maintain some amount of peace in the home,
Right.
sometimes I've seen that, and then I've seen the other end of the spectrum where parents break off relationships.
Are they afraid? Are parents afraid?
Parents are afraid, 100%.
Wow.
And
who's caused them to be afraid? Has the system caused
I think
them?
it's the system. I think a lot of it is the system, and I'm talking about parents I'm talking about immigrant parents.
Yeah.
They're petrified that they're going to lose their kids.
Right. Unless they go along with
Unless they go along with the kids. And you have kids who will self-harm.
or threaten. Right?
No, self-harm.
So
cut themselves.
They'll cut themselves, or they'll threaten their parents. Like, I'll call the police.
CAS. I'm going to call, So all of this manipulation that happens, and then these are hardworking parents who are trying to make a living,
Right.
who are
And
just
probably don't have a lot of time in the home.
100%, and don't know the system. Like, they don't know the system.
Right.
So they feel the kids are going to be taken away from them, and that's not what they want.
So, Susan, who is fueling these children? Like, let's talk a little bit. We've talked about access, to substance,
Yes,
and we probably have more children on, marijuana. Listen, I walk through the malls,
And you can smell it.
You can smell it.
Yep.
I mean, you're like, wow. And these are young people. Access to social media, and I don't want to come across like I'm from the dark ages, and we shouldn't have social media. But from an OT. From an OT's perspective, what impact can I say it this way, unregulated, let me put it to you that way.
Yeah.
Isn't it amazing that I go on my phone, my iPad now, they have apps that tell me, hey, this is how much time you've spent on this phone, and creators of, whether it's Apple, whatever, that don't want their children to be on the devices and the apps that they've created. What is the impact of social media that is unregulated, without boundaries, as you talked about earlier? How does that play a part in what we're talking about?
That's a huge issue. So I've counseled and coached young kids on one of the things that they asked me to go in as an occupational therapist is on coaching for addictions and self-esteem to social media. And that's what the diagnosis is. It's not even a diagnosis, but that's what I go in for.
Wow.
And I talk to them about what is drawing you to it. The reason they're drawn to it is because it's kids typically their own age or who claim to be their own age. We don't know who's putting up these posts. It's not regulated. So these kids are just following these TikToks and these Instas and all of these accounts,
Right.
which is not regulated.
Right.
So anyone who knows me knows I'm an avid social media follower.
Right.
I'm active on social media, but I'm very mindful of what my kids watch.
Right.
Because it's good to have, social media is great, but at the same time, these kids are getting information, misinformed. It's not professionals.
Right.
I even tell my kids, and I say kids, I'm talking about the patients. I call all of them kids. My patients, I tell them, it's Dr. Google.
Right.
There's a reason why we all go to universities and we go to medical profession. We go to professional colleges to get a degree.
Yes.
Do you even look at the authenticity of those people who are posting these comments and this?
Right.
Anyone can put anything on,
Wow.
right? So.
Wow. So let me ask you the question. How young have you seen people with devices? Like,
Oh, I've seen kids as young as so I was talking to a family the other day. I don't know if the kid can even do what we call a pincer grip, which is typically develops at 9 months.
Right.
and the kid can swipe.
Wow.
Kids as young as 10 months old, I've seen them with their strollers, and on the strollers have attachments for their devices.
Wow.
A 10-month-old, and even our our pediatricians, when I work for the neonatal follow-up clinic,
Right.
our pediatricians, the recommendation is no screen time. This is the prescription by the pediatrician to the family. No screen time for your kid unless he's over the age of 2. And if he's over the age of 2, not more than 30 minutes.
At a time.
No, 30 minutes period
Per day?
per day.
Wow. Wow.
So,
Wow. Susan, I'm telling you, you just opened up a can of worms there.
I know.
Wow, that's amazing. Because these devices are, if my statistics are still correct, I think in America, it is higher than crack cocaine. I think it was either number 3 or number 5, something in that area of addictions in America now are people's devices. And they're saying that it's harder to get people off their phones than crack cocaine. But Susan, in the last few minutes, if I were to ask you, to give us 3 things that you would say to parents regarding their children and mental health issues, what would be, as an occupational therapist, either someone that's in it or they want to make sure that their children avoid it, if you gave us 3 principles for parents, what would they be?
So 1, talk to your kids and listen. It's easy for a parent to talk but not listen to their child. So listen to your kids, because at the end of the day, all of my patients tell me is if only someone would listen. And that's the reason why they like being in the unit, is because we are actually giving them the opportunity to listen.
Wow.
So 1 is that.
Right.
Secondly, you know what? Don't put pressure on your kids to be you. Let them be authentically them. So if the kid wants to be, if my kid wants to play the drums, then that's what I'm going to encourage him to do. I don't want him to be an engineer, because that might be my dream. It's not his dream.
Or an OT.
No, my daughter doesn't want to be an OT. So, so that would be the second. And then the third would be very mindful about screen time and what content they're watching.
Wow.
So our schooling is even happening on, we have to use devices for our schooling.
Right.
So we can't run away from it, but be mindful of what content they're watching.
So number 1 is really, you said, relationship.
Yes. Yeah.
Number 2, don't try to make your children, you and
yeah.
the things you couldn't accomplish. And then number 3, there has to be boundaries around social. So not only the devices, but the areas of the devices that, and the apps and various things that they go into. Well, Susan, this has been amazing.
Thank you.
Honestly, I think I need to have you back. I think that we just can't unpack this in 2 programs, but truly from the bottom of my heart, I thank you, and we trust that you have been impacted. We trust that you will share these messages. And will you come back? Will you?
In a heartbeat.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us. Hey, my friends, I'm Dr. Tony Soldano, and this is What Was That About?